Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7.
It's great to be back.
So today we are tackling a stack of ancient texts that present a claim so radical it actually feels a bit uncomfortable to modern ears.
Hmm.
We're analyzing documents that argue the fundamental nature of the universe isn't, indifference. It's not just cold, empty space or random atoms bouncing around.
Right.
Instead, these texts claim the universe is undergirded by a specific, intense, almost overwhelming kind of love.
And we really have to be careful with that word love because in our culture it can be a very soft, sentimental word. But the love described in these sources, Hosea, Romans, the Psalms, it's fierce. It's
So
structural.
it's not a greeting card.
Not at all. It explores a really stark contrast.
Okay.
A godless mindset defined by sort of a closed loop of self-flattery versus a worldview where a deity is simultaneously a gardener, a warrior, and a grieving parent.
So it's the difference between being an orphan in a cold universe and being a child in a very crowded, very attentive house.
Exactly. And we aren't here to preach. We're here to investigate the internal logic of this worldview. We want to see how these texts construct a reality where love is a cosmic force that dries out fear and fundamentally alters the human status from enemy to friend.
Before we get into the heavy lifting, and we are going to break down the psychology of atheism according to these texts, I do have a quick request. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
So should you start with the definition of the deity?
Let's do it. We have to start with 1 John chapter 4. It has this three-word phrase that people put on coffee mugs, but I think they miss the weight of it. God is love.
Right. It doesn't say God has love or God is loving on Tuesdays. It says God is love.
Meaning.
It's an ontological statement.
Okay, break down ontological for us.
It means it's about his substance, his actual stuff. Think of it this way. If you have a bucket of water and you spill it, you get wet. Why? Because water is wet. It can't help it. This text is claiming that if you were to cut this deity, he would bleed love. It's not a mood swing. It's his raw material.
And that connects to 1 Corinthians 13, right? We usually hear this at weddings. Love is patient, love is kind, and we think it's advice for the bride and groom.
But in the context of the source material, it's actually a profile of the deity. If God is love, then you have to plug him into that definition. God is patient, God is kind, God keeps no record of wrongs.
That last part, keeps no record of wrongs, is structurally huge. I mean, it implies the delete key is hit constantly. But here is where the text throws a curveball. We usually think of a God of love as being, I don't know, soft or distant. But then you read Hosea chapter 11, and it is startlingly emotional.
Hosea is fascinating because it just shatters that ancient idea of the unmoved mover. In ancient philosophy, gods were stoic. They didn't feel. But here, God is depicted as a parent teaching a toddler to walk.
The imagery is so specific. It says, "It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms."
It's vulnerable. It describes God lifting a child to his cheek, bending down to feed them. But the tension comes because the child, the people, runs away.
They reject the parent.
They reject the parent. And logically, if you're the supreme being, you just wipe them out and start over. You don't need the aggravation.
But the text describes this internal conflict within God. He says, "How can I give you up? My heart is changed within me."
That phrase, "my heart is changed," implies anguish.
Yeah.
The source material is arguing that God isn't indifferent to human rejection. He is actually wounded by it.
Wow.
He refuses to execute his fierce anger because, as he says, I am God and not a man.
Which is a complete flip of the script. We usually think humans are the emotional ones, and God is the cold calculator.
Exactly. The text says the opposite. Humans are the ones who get angry and vindictive. The mark of divinity here is the capacity to absorb pain without retaliating.
And that restraint isn't just about holding back anger, it turns into celebration. We have Zephaniah 3 in the stack.
The singing God.
The singing God.
Yes. The text sets a scene with these corrupt officials. It calls them roaring lions and evening wolves. It's a picture of a predatory society.
Chaos.
Total chaos. But then it pivots to the deity in their midst. It says he will quiet you with his love and rejoice over you with singing.
I tried to visualize that. You have the roaring of the wolves, the political noise, and then this humming, singing presence in the center that just quiets everything down.
It frames the divine presence not as a terrifying judge, but as a protector, celebrating the safety of his people.
So, okay, we have this intense, singing, grieving, loving deity. That's one side of the equation. But the texts also spend a lot of time defining the other side. They talk about the godless mindset.
Right.
And this is where I want to slow down because the analysis of unbelief in these texts is really, really psychological.
It is. The source material doesn't view atheism or godlessness as just an intellectual position like choosing Android over iPhone. It describes it as a specific malfunction of the human ego. Look at Psalm 36.
It starts with, there is no fear of God before their eyes.
Right. Now, we often hear fear of God and think of terror. But in this context, fear means having an external reference point, a true north that isn't you.
So if you remove that true north...
The text explains exactly what happens. In their own eyes, they flatter themselves too much to detect or hate their sin.
Flatter themselves. That's a really interesting way to put it.
It's a closed-loop psychology. If there is no God, no external observer or judge, then you become the judge. And the human ego is a terrible judge of itself because it's biased. It always rules in its own favor.
So the text is arguing that without God, you lose the ability to self-audit.
Precisely. You lose the mirror. The text says these individuals plot evil even on their beds. They've lost the ability to detect their own corruption because they have defined themselves as the standard of good.
It's the ultimate ego hack. You can never be wrong if you're the only standard.
That's it.
That's a heavy diagnosis. It suggests that what we call freedom from religion might actually be a trap of self-delusion. And Romans chapter 8 takes it even further. It calls this state the mind governed by the flesh.
And it describes that mind as hostile to God. Not neutral, hostile.
Why hostile? I mean, if I don't believe in Bigfoot, I'm not hostile to Bigfoot. I just don't care.
Because, according to the text, the flesh, that human drive for autonomy, it hates the idea of submission. It cannot submit to God's law. It wants to be the captain.
So it fights back.
It fights back. When it encounters a claim of divine authority, it doesn't just shrug, it attacks. The text paints a very binary picture. The realm of the flesh leads to death, and the realm of the spirit leads to life and peace.
This hostility and disconnect bring us to the metaphor in John 15, the vine and the branches. This is probably the most famous image in our stack, but I feel like we miss the brutality of it.
It is brutal. Jesus says, I am the vine, you are the branches. And then he drops a hammer. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Nothing. That seems like an exaggeration. I mean, I know plenty of people who aren't religious who do lots of things. They build companies, they write books, they run marathons.
And that's where we have to look at the biology of the metaphor.
Yeah.
Think about a branch that's been cut off from a tree. For a few days, maybe even weeks, it still has leaves. It looks like a branch.
Sure.
You could even use it to swat a fly, so it's doing something. But is it alive?
No. It's dying. The sap is gone.
Exactly. The text is arguing that you can be a very busy dead branch. You can generate activity, but you cannot generate life. The source material claims that existence apart from the source is just a slow process of withering.
And then it says the branches are picked up and thrown into the fire.
Right.
So we have a massive problem. We have a humanity that is psychologically trapped in a self-flattering loop, essentially withering away while thinking they're thriving. And on the other side, you have this holy, singing, grieving God. How do these two things connect? Because if dry wood touches fire, it just burns.
And this brings us to the mechanics of redemption.
Yeah.
How do you bridge that gap without destroying the person? The text in Romans 5 is adamant. We don't build the bridge.
It says, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us.
That word still is doing so much work. The text makes a comparison. It says, you might see a soldier die for a good king or a friend die for a good friend. That's heroic. But God demonstrates his own love by dying for enemies.
It's a total reversal of human logic. We help those who help us. We network with people who can offer us value.
And this deity sacrifices himself for people who are actively hostile toward him. And there's a legal mechanism here, too. The text in Romans 5 draws a parallel between Adam and Christ.
The two Adams theory.
Exactly. This part can get a little dense, so let's try to break it down simply.
Please.
Think of it like a factory reset on a computer or maybe a genetic code. The text argues that the first human, Adam, introduced a virus into the operating system.
A computer virus, that's the analogy.
That's the analogy. He sinned, and that virus of death spread to everyone born after him. We are all born with the glitch.
So we are defective by default.
According to the text, yes, the system is corrupted. But then comes the second Adam, Jesus. And the text argues that just as the virus entered through one man, the antivirus, the cure, enters through one man.
So it's a symmetrical reversal. One man broke it, one man fixed it.
Exactly. It's a legal and spiritual reset. But it goes beyond just fixing the glitch. It upgrades the user. Romans 8 and Ephesians 3 talk about adoption.
This connects back to John 15, where Jesus says, I no longer call you servants, I have called you friends.
And Romans 8 goes even higher. It says the Spirit testifies that we are God's children. It uses the Aramaic term Abba, which is like saying Papa or Dad.
It's shockingly intimate.
It really is. You go from hostile enemy to withering branch to servant to friend and finally to heir.
Heirs of God and co-heirs with Christ, that is a massive promotion. It implies that everything that belongs to the deity now belongs to the believer.
It changes the entire status of the human being. You aren't a fugitive anymore. You're family.
Okay, so that's the theology, that's the mechanics of how it works, the factory reset, the adoption paper. But I want to pivot to the user experience. If this is true, if you are actually an heir, what does life feel like? Because the texts in Psalm 91 and Isaiah 43 describe a very specific kind of reality.
They do. They focus heavily on the concept of total protection. But we have to be careful because it's not the kind of protection that means nothing bad ever happens.
Right. Isaiah 43 says, when you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you.
Notice the preposition, through. It doesn't say, I will airlift you over the fire or I will dry up the river. It says you are going through it.
But you won't be burned.
That's the promise. Preservation within the crisis. The fire is real, but the damage is negated.
And Psalm 91 is basically an action movie script. It talks about a fowler's snare and deadly pestilence. It says, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you.
The imagery is of a fortress. But there is a specific detail in Psalm 91 that I find fascinating regarding the angels.
Oh, the verse about the foot and the stone.
Yes. He will command his angels concerning you, so that you will not strike your foot against a stone. Think about the scale of that. You have a God managing the universe, singing over cities, but he has assigned detailed security to make sure you don't stub your toe.
It suggests a level of micromanagement in the affection. It paints a picture of a believer walking inside an invisible bubble.
And we can't talk about walking through danger without hitting Psalm 23.
The classic, the Lord is my shepherd.
But look at the shift in grammar. In the beginning of the psalm, David is talking about God. He makes me lie down. He leads me.
Right.
But when he gets to the valley of the shadow of death, the grammar changes. He stops talking about God and starts talking to God.
For you are with me.
Exactly. The theology shifts to relationship when the lights go out. The antidote to the fear of the valley isn't a map out of it. It's the presence of the shepherd in it.
And Ephesians 3 tries to put a measurement on this presence. It talks about the width and length and height and depth of love.
It's an attempt to measure the immeasurable. And then you have Psalm 103 and 136 giving us the timeline and the geography.
Psalm 136 is that rhythmic chant. His love endures forever. It repeats it 26 times. It just anchors history in the permanence of that love.
And Psalm 103 gives us the geography of forgiveness. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us.
I've always loved that image because if you go north, eventually you hit the pole and start going south. But if you go east...
You are always going east. You never hit a west pole. It suggests that the sin is removed to a place of infinite distance. It can never be found again.
That sets us up perfectly for the conclusion of this whole investigation. We've looked at the God who feels, the mind that rejects him, the sacrifice that bridges the gap, and the protection that follows. But where does it all end up? What is the final verdict?
The final verdict is found in the opening of Romans chapter 8. It's a legal declaration. Therefore, there is now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus.
No condemnation. That's the gavel coming down.
It is the dismissal of all charges. The source text argues that because the virus, the sin was dealt with in the second Adam, the law has no claim on the believer. You are legally untouchable.
And because of that legal standing, we get this incredible crescendo at the end of Romans 8 about the unbreakable bond.
The writer acts like a lawyer challenging the universe. He asks, who shall separate us from the love of Christ? And then he lists every possible threat. Trouble, hardship, famine, nakedness, danger, sword.
And then he gets cosmic. Neither angels nor demons, neither the present nor the future, neither height nor depth.
He is scanning the entire known universe, the physical world, the spiritual world, and the dimension of time itself. And he concludes that nothing in all creation can snap that bond.
And the result of that security. we are more than conquerors.
Which brings us full circle to 1 John 4. Perfect love drives out fear.
Walk us through the logic there one last time.
The text says fear has to do with punishment. The reason we have existential dread, the reason we fear death or the cosmos, is that deep down, we fear judgment. We fear that we are wrong.
Okay.
But if no condemnation is true, if the penalty has been paid and the bond is unbreakable, then punishment is off the table.
And if there's no punishment?
Then there is no logical reason for fear. The terror of judgment is dissolved by the reality of this specific structural love.
Yeah.
You don't fear a God who is singing over you. You don't fear a shepherd who is walking with you.
It creates an architecture of safety. It's a worldview where you are just hedged in by affection on every side.
It is.
So we've unpacked a lot. We went from the closed loop of the atheist mind trapped in self-flattery to the open arms of a singing God, a journey from withering branch to adopted heir. But as we wrap up, I want to leave the listener with something to chew on. What is the one provocation from these texts that should haunt us a little bit?
I think we have to go back to the vine in John 15. The text makes that binary claim. Apart from me, you can do nothing.
Right.
If you take that seriously, it is a massive challenge to our modern definition of success. We're obsessed with legacy, career, building empires, getting likes. But this text suggests that any achievement, no matter how impressive, no matter how much money it makes, if it's disconnected from the source, is essentially just dry wood.
It's kindling.
Exactly. It implies that secular achievement without spiritual connection is ultimately illusory. It asks the listener a hard question. Is the fruit I'm producing in my life something that will actually last? Or is it just decoration on a dying branch? It redefines what it means to be alive.
That is a heavy question to end on, but I think that's the point of these deep dives. To rethink the baseline. Thank you for walking us through this.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We'll see you on the next one.